The scientific rationale for integrated training. Following this presentation, the participant will be able to describe the physical state of the current client, rationalize the need for an integrated program design, describe the optimum performance training or OPT model and the supporting scientific rationale. To understand the rationale behind integrated training, it's imperative for the health and fitness professional to first understand the current state of today's society. From the mid-1980s to the present, the wealth of technology and automation in the United States has begun to take a toll on public health. In 1985, the International Obesity Task Force deemed the prevalence of obesity an epidemic. Today, approximately 30% of adults are estimated to be obese. This carries over to the adolescent population, with 16% of teenagers considered overweight. The American population is also living longer. The U.S. Census Bureau reported that the proportion of the population over 65 is projected to increase from 12.4% in 2000 to 19.6% in 2030. This lends to the number of individuals developing chronic diseases and disability. In the United States, approximately 80% of all persons aged over 65 have at least one chronic condition, and 50% have at least two. 1 in 5 adults reports having doctor-diagnosed arthritis, a leading cause of disability. Meanwhile, daily activity levels continue to decline. People are less active and are no longer spending as much of their free time engaged in physical activity. Physical education and after-school sport programs are being cut from school budgets, further decreasing the amount of physical activity in children's lives. This new environment is producing more inactive and non-functional people, leading to structural deficiencies and injury. Musculoskeletal injury. Research suggests that musculoskeletal pain is more common now than it was 40 years ago. This lends support to the concept that decreased activity may lead to muscular dysfunction and, ultimately, injury. Some of the major topics studied include low back pain, knee injuries, chronic diseases in the adult population, and musculoskeletal injuries. Low back pain is one of the major forms of musculoskeletal degeneration seen in the adult population, affecting nearly 80% of all adults. Research has shown low back pain to be predominant among workers in enclosed workspaces, such as offices, as well as in people engaged in manual labor, people who sit for periods of time greater than 3 hours, and in people who have altered lumbar lordosis, or an exaggerated curvature of the low back. The incidence of knee injuries is also a concern. An estimated 80,000 to 100,000 anterior cruciate ligament, or ACL injuries, occur annually in the general U.S. population. Approximately 70% of these are non-contact injuries. Non-contact injuries would include losing your balance stepping off a curb or planting your foot to change directions while running. Most ACL injuries occur between 15 and 25 years of age. This comes as no surprise when considering the lack of activity and increased obesity occurring in this age group. Another contributor to musculoskeletal injuries include unnatural posture, which results in increased neck, mid and lower back, shoulder, and leg pain. Work-related injuries also become a factor, with over 40% of the injuries coming in the form of sprains and strains. More than 1/3 of all work-related injuries involve the trunk, and of these, over 60% involve the low back. And how much does this all cost? The monetary value of lost work time due to these musculoskeletal injuries was estimated to be approximately $120 billion. So what does this all mean? Simply put, the extent to which we condition our musculoskeletal system directly influences our risk of injury. The less conditioned our musculoskeletal systems are, the higher the risk of injury. Therefore, as our daily lives include less physical activity, the less prepared we are to partake in recreational and leisure activities, such as resistance training, weekend sports, or simply playing on the playground. Traditional training program. Now that we have an understanding of today's client, let's now take a look at how most traditional training programs are designed and the carryover to the needs of today's client. Number 1. Most traditional training programs do not emphasize movements in all 3 planes of motion, sagittal, frontal, and transverse planes. Most programs include exercises that are primarily sagittal plane dominant, or movements that are performed in a forward or anterior and backward or posterior motion. Examples of these types of movements include rows, presses, and front lunges. Rarely do you see individuals performing exercises requiring them to move from side to side, or the frontal plane, or in rotation, also considered the transverse plane. Interestingly, many injuries occur while moving in the transverse plane, yet traditional exercise programming does not challenge an individual's ability to control themselves in this plane. So, with this said, it will be important that training programs of today challenge individuals' ability to control themselves in all three planes of motion. Number 2. Most traditional training programs do not emphasize all three contractions in the contraction spectrum. Most of the emphasis is placed on how much weight one can lift concentrically. Rarely do you see one emphasize how slowly they can eccentrically lower the weight back to the starting position, or how well they can isometrically stabilize the load before they lift the weight again. However, most injuries occur during the eccentric and isometric phases of movement. Individuals are typically not trained efficiently to slow themselves down or decelerate, nor are they efficient in their ability to dynamically stabilize themselves, with injury being the end result. For this reason, it's important for programs of today to emphasize all three contractions of the muscle action spectrum: the concentric contraction, or lifting the load, the eccentric contraction, or lowering the load, and the isometric contraction to stabilize themselves while performing the exercise. Lastly, many traditional programs do not challenge individuals in proprioceptively enriched environments. A proprioceptively enriched environment is one that challenges the internal balance and stabilization mechanisms of the body. Examples of this include performing a dumbbell chest press while on a stability ball, or performing an overhead press on one leg. It's important to include exercises that challenge the internal balance and stabilization mechanisms of the body, or proprioception, so they'll be better prepared to control themselves in unstable environments outside the gym, or protect them from injury, and will also allow them to be better prepared for higher intensity exercise in the future. The OPT model. The new mindset in fitness should cater to creating programs that address functional capacity as part of a safe program designed especially for each individual person. In other words, training programs must consider each person, their environment, and the tasks that will be performed. This is best achieved by introducing an integrated approach to program design. It is upon this premise that the National Academy of Sports Medicine, NASM, presents the rationale for integrated training and the Optimum Performance Training, or OPT model. Let's first define integrated training. Integrated training is a concept that incorporates all forms of training in an integrated fashion as part of a progressive system. These forms of training include flexibility training, cardiorespiratory training, core training, balance training, reactive training, speed, agility, and quickness training, and resistance training. This system was developed by NASM and is termed Optimum Performance Training, or OPT. The OPT model was conceptualized as a training program for a society that has more physical structural imbalances and susceptibility to injury than ever before. It's a process of programming that systematically progresses any client to any goal. The model is divided into three different building blocks: stabilization, strength, and power. Each building block contains a specific phase or phases of training. It is imperative that the fitness professional understands the scientific rationale behind each building block in order to properly utilize the OPT model. Starting with the foundation of the model, the stabilization level. This level of training consists of one phase of training, stabilization endurance training, with the main focus being to increase stabilization endurance, flexibility, and develop optimum levels of neuromuscular efficiency. This level will help prepare the neuromuscular system for higher intensity exercise to follow in the preceding levels. The progression for this stage of training is proprioceptively based. In other words, rather than increasing load, you increase the stabilization requirements of the exercise. This may come in the form of performing an exercise from 2 arms to alternating arms, from 2 legs to 1 leg, or from a sitting position to a standing position. The loads used at this level are lower, with the repetitions being higher to enhance endurance. We'll review this level of training in more detail in the program design lesson of this course. Once an individual has developed appropriate amounts of stability, they can then progress to the strength level of the model. The strength level of the model consists of 3 phases of training: Phase 2, strength endurance; Phase 3, hypertrophy; and Phase 4, maximal strength. In Phase 2, strength endurance, the training goal is to maintain stabilization endurance while increasing prime mover strength. These 2 adaptations are accomplished by performing 2 exercises in a superset sequence, or back-to-back without rest, with similar joint dynamics. One exercise is a more traditional strength exercise performed in a more stable environment, while the other is an integrated exercise performed in a less stable yet controllable environment. For example, one would first perform a chest press on a bench, then immediately perform a chest press on a stability ball. The principle behind this method is to work the prime movers predominantly in the first exercise in order to elicit prime mover strength. Then immediately follow with an exercise that challenges the stabilization muscles. This produces an increased ability to maintain postural stabilization and dynamic joint stabilization. In Phase 3, hypertrophy, the training goal is to achieve optimum levels of muscular hypertrophy. To elicit muscular hypertrophy requires a high level of training intensity and volume. Traditionally, this is where a lot of individuals begin their training. However, hopefully, you can now understand the importance that one must progress to this level of training to decrease the risk of injury and ensure they attain their goal. This phase of training is optional, depending on the individual's goal. In Phase 4, maximal strength, the training goal is to achieve maximal prime mover strength by lifting heavy loads. This form of training increases motor unit recruitment and the frequency of motor unit recruitment, with peak force production being the end product, or maximal strength. As with Phase 3, hypertrophy training, this phase of training is optional depending on the individual's goal. The strength training level of the OPT model will be discussed further in the program design lesson of the course. Once an individual has obtained optimal levels of strength, they can now progress to the power level of the model. The power level consists of 1 phase of training: power training. This level of training emphasizes the development of speed and power, or rate of force production, while maintaining prime mover strength. In this phase, one would superset a traditional strength exercise with an explosive power exercise of similar joint mechanics. This is to enhance prime mover strength while also improving the rate of force production. One would not enter into this level of training until they have developed proper amounts of stabilization, Phase 1, and strength, Phases 2, 3, and 4. This will help decrease the risk of injury while ensuring improvements in performance. The power level of the model will be discussed further in the program design lesson of the course. Summary. The uniqueness of the OPT model is that it packages scientific principles into an applicable form of programming. This is a direct result of testing within NASM's clinical setting used on actual clients. NASM has developed a template that provides health and fitness professionals with specific guidelines for creating an individualized program. The program template contains client information and is broken down into 4 sections. The warm-up section, which includes your flexibility, foam rolling and stretching, and cardiorespiratory components. Movement preparation section, which includes your core, balance, and reactive training components. Your resistance training section, and your cool-down. The template is laid out to illustrate step-by-step how to take your client through their program. We'll be referring back to this template throughout the course and how to fill out a template when designing a program. So, in summary, when working with today's typical client who is likely to be deconditioned, fitness professionals must take special consideration when designing programs. An integrated approach should be used to create safe programs that consider functional capacity for each individual person. They must address factors such as flexibility, improving stability, increasing strength and endurance, enhance cardiorespiratory capacity, and training in different types of environments. These are the basis for NASM's OPT model. The Optimum Performance Training, or OPT model, provides a system for properly and safely progressing any client to his or her goals by utilizing integrated training methods. It consists of 3 building blocks: stabilization, strength, and power. The stabilization level addresses muscular imbalances and attempts to improve the stabilization of joints and overall posture. This training block has one phase of training. Phase 1, Stabilization Endurance Training. The strength level focuses on enhancing stabilization and strength endurance. Phase 2, Strength Endurance Training, while increasing muscle size. Phase 3, Hypertrophy Training, and/or Maximal Prime Mover Strength. Phase 4, Maximal Strength Training. The power level is designed to target specific forms of training that are necessary for maximal rate of force production. This stage has one phase of training. Phase 5,